Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 64 of the Online Tennis Podcast. Today we're talking US Open Finals, and I am joined by Mr. John Silk. How are you doing, John?
Not bad, not bad. Yeah, a little jaded perhaps, but not bad.
Yeah, John was at the US Open Final, the Swiatek Jabeur one, so I'm sure he's still recovering from a little bit of a jet lag, maybe. However, yeah, I'm sure it was all worth it, John. It looked like an amazing final. Of course, we were watching it on Talking Tennis. Go check out John's channel if you can. We are going to talk Alcaraz defeating Ruud. We're going to talk Swiatek defeating Jabeur. If you want some more analytical stuff, please go to the blog. This will sort of be bigger picture stuff today. More of an overall takeaways and impressions the champions left on us. And if you're watching it on YouTube, please like and subscribe. I think the first place to start would be Swiatek defeating Jabeur, John. And of course, you were on the ground for that one. Maybe the first question off the bat is just how did it feel in the stadium? What was the crowd like? What was the whole experience like?
It was great. I think something a little bit different about the crowd and the build up to this was the fact that there seems to be a huge Polish population, either directly or indirectly through generations, in, around, and nearby New York. Even the Canadian border is only a few hours away, and I think it might well be either one big Canadian city nearby, and I forget which one it is, has a huge population of Polish. So, and you have a Tunisian population too. In fact, my barber on the morning of the match was also Tunisian. As it turned out, I didn't handpick him.
Uh,
Um, so you had this kind of thing, and both were sort of dressed up in the colours, and the football shirts, if you like. And this does seem to be it seems to be a thing that you don't really know what to wear to support your player, because unless you've got a picture of their face on your t-shirt or a tattoo, which could be a little bit on the scary side, the football shirt is the easy thing to go to. And you saw this quite a lot, and I can't recall a match where there was so much support for one player or another in it being obvious in terms of color. And we did talk about it on the stream, or I heard you guys speculate about it on the stream as to who had the most support. For me, it was pretty clear that Iga had the stronger support, albeit that, of course, as it went through the second set, perhaps some of the neutrals were hoping for a third set, and so therefore Ons Jabeur got a bit more support.
yeah, it's really interesting. And I think one thing I mentioned on the stream in particular, John, was that a lot of maybe casual tennis fans weren't aware of Iga Swiatek certainly before this tournament, and I feel like certainly the US Open maybe is and I mean Iga touched on this herself, is maybe the biggest platform for players to become known, and that's certainly what's happened to Emma Raducanu over the last year. Elsewhere than just Britain, but certainly Britain as well, because we're maybe not the biggest tennis nation, despite Wimbledon, of course. But yeah, I think Swiatek certainly seems to be on the map now. Saw her on a big billboard in Times Square and stuff like that. I think this is actually going to be very different from her career from winning two French Opens, and I don't know if it'll benefit her actually. Well, maybe that's a question, John. Just if you've got some insight on that, I don't know, or an opinion on it. Do you feel like her being more well known will benefit her, because she is a player that talks about pressure a lot, that talks about expectations and how it affects her game? Do you think it'll rattle her at all?
No, I don't. She seems to be somebody on the tour that sort of handles this mental side of it better than anyone, or at least as well as anyone, until now. I mean, we do see even the greats go through a little trough at some point or another, but I don't see it on the horizon. I mean, in terms of ability, she seems to have adapted really well to two of the three surfaces now. So we've got three of the four slams where she will go into those slams among or even the favourite, of course, at Roland Garros. And that doesn't seem to have bothered her at Roland Garros, where you would think perhaps, where she is a heavy favourite, and we may go into Rafa-esque territory at some point in her career as she heads into Paris. And I think, in a way, we're almost there. I'm not suggesting that she'll end up winning 14 of the things, but we are in that territory where she's so far ahead of the field at Roland Garros, and it doesn't seem to affect her at all. She still steamrollers the field. She also seems to have benefited extremely well from her psychologist or psychology coach, if you like, that I know she had.
Daria Abramovich. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I should remember that surname, bearing in mind I'm a football fan, albeit not Chelsea. But yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think she's really benefited, and I know she she's pretty much there front and center with the team. Iga obviously wants it that way, and you see the pictures of them with the trophy afterwards with the 3 or 4 key members of the team, and Daria is certainly among them. So I don't see it. But I mean, you never know. What we don't know generally though is we don't really know how somebody is going into their first major final. And I know we're going to come on to Carlos Alcaraz shortly and stuff, but we don't really know what that territory is like until they're there. We do at least have a sample size now of 3 major finals with Iga and 10 or 11 finals, is it in total? Something like that.
Yeah, something close to that.
Where she's not even dropped a set.
Yeah,
So
certainly
that's
10 in a row, 10 straight sets in a row.
there you
Yeah.
go. So it's 20 straight sets, exactly. So we've got a pretty good level of evidence at the moment that suggests she'll be just fine.
Yeah, loads to touch on there, John. Really interesting stuff you said there, because she did say this tournament was different from Roland Garros in that it was mentally less exhausting than the French Open, actually, because she went into the French Open with all that expectation, and basically anything other than a win was a disappointment. So the fact that she came into this tournament with nobody looking at her basically as the favourite after losses to Keys in Cincinnati, loss in Toronto to Beatrice Haddad-Maia, I think she felt like that the fact the expectation was gone almost helped her. And this is the thing about Iga. She talks about herself as a very underconfident person, and when the expectation isn't on her, she doesn't have to work as hard almost. She said this tournament was a lot harder than the French Open physically, though, obviously because of the conditions. And she was happy to sort of miss shots. She accepted that as the tournament went on. And all of these factors, the fact that the expectation was off, the fact that she knew she would play underconfidently, conversely helped her. And it's really scary for the rest of the field that it almost is a benefit for Swiatek that when she's playing less well at a tournament that's massive, it can help her. Certainly we saw against Niemer, if that's how you pronounce her name, when she was a breakdown, the Germans game started to sort of go away and Swiatek was able to go into lockdown against Sabalenka. It was almost like surefire that Swiatek would come back from that 4-2 deficit. He just never felt like she was properly in danger. And that wasn't so much Sabalenka's fault. That was just Swiatek stepping it up. I think she broke to love to get the break back. It's almost like when when the focus isn't on her, she plays a lot better. What she said exactly was when she goes onto the court in a final, she's able to focus on the things that are going to make her play better. And she realises that even when she's feeling less confident, it doesn't matter if she makes mistakes, she'll eventually find her game. And it's that self-belief that's just impossible to match for some players. And I think that's the biggest difference.
Yeah, I think just one thing on some of the things you mentioned there, Jack. I think the mental strength is arguably what sets her most apart, certainly when it comes to finals compared to her peers. I do think, and I know we're here to talk about the final, but it is indirectly related. I do think the one player who came closest to her, at least in terms of the scoreboard, was Sabalenka. And I know, it very much Iga was as responsible for the break back at 4-2 as anyone, of course. But I do think Sabalenka will be the one player in the tournament, maybe even more than Ons, who she played in the final, who have the most regrets with how that turned out. And we talk about the mental strength required to emerge victorious in semi-finals as well. I mean, she's obviously winning lots of semi-finals, Iga. I don't know exactly what her record is, but she tends to go out before the semi-finals too. I don't remember her losing. I remember she lost at Roland Garros in the quarters last year. I think it was to Maria Sakkari, was it? Roland Garros last year?
Yeah.
So she's obviously got a pretty good semi-final record. And I've heard one or two other pros mention how tough semi-finals can also be in terms of pressure, and sometimes more so than finals. And yet we also see players like Maria Sakkari, but also Sabalenka, who get to this semi-final block. And as I say, I think it'll be Sabalenka amongst all of those players. I mean, Niemeyer, who you also touched upon on that route that she had, obviously losing the final set 6-love. She sort of had her momentum broken midway through the second set. But it'll be Sabalenka who has most regrets, I think, regarding this tournament and the match against Iga.
Yeah, I don't have the semi-final record in front of me, John, but you're quite right. I actually feel that Swiatek's record, just deep in tournaments in general, should be regarded as an achievement, not just her record in finals, because it almost feels like as she gets used to the conditions more and more, that's when she becomes super dangerous. The other thing as well that was quite interesting about this tournament that Swiatek mentioned was the weather actually got less hot by the end of the tournament. So I feel like if we'd seen it as hot as it was at the start of the tournament, it actually could have. We could have seen Swiatek go out because obviously it was that close against Sabalenka. You know, a change in conditions could be all the difference needed to
Mhm.
make Swiatek's game sort of unravel a bit. So fate kind of intervened as well, John.
Interestingly, there wasn't much talk regarding the weather in the latter stages of the tournament, and you're right, it's possibly because it wasn't, as hot as it was in the first week in particular. But even was the final under the men's final? Was it, because I wasn't at the men's final? Was it under a roof, by the way? Because
No,
it was open
I'm
because it was
almost
very
certain it
drizzly.
wasn't. Right, I didn't realize that.
It was very drizzly that day, so I guess it was obviously not raining at the point of the match taking place. But that's funny because regarding the men's final, I mean, as it turns out, it wasn't under the roof, but um, there were so many conversations about the roof when it's Djokovic against Nadal.
Yeah,
I think possibly because the players talk about it so much. I mean, okay, they're asked about it, but it's probably a 50-50 thing regarding the press. And yet it wasn't really mentioned for any other person or any other match. Other than I think when it closed mid-match during it with TFO, the poor
yeah.
Francis had it close upon him, and as he's serving mid-match, which is a bizarre,
That was against
thing
Rafa,
to.
right?
Yeah, against Rafa.
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it was a bizarre thing to allow to happen. But anyway, listen, this is Iga's moment, and she was just phenomenal. And in that final, from the moment she broke at the beginning of the match, I think she went a double breakup early on. I think it was 4-love pretty quickly. She nearly goes a double breakup, of course, in the second set. Um, as it turned out, Jabeur, we have to give a lot of credit for constantly reeling her in, because there was sort of, she should go break up, then it would be back on serve, then she'd go break up, then she'd be back on serve. And even right near the end, I think Iga in the sort of 11th game or 12th game of the second set had one or two championship points, and still
yeah.
Ons kept reeling her back in, if you like. So she forced the tiebreak.
Yeah, perfect segue there, John, because I want to give Jabeur a little bit of credit and maybe talk about her chances on in the future. But for me, Jabeur's USP all week was her ability to fight back in the face of adversity. Certainly, Elizabeth Mandlik at the start of the week serving for their first set in their second round. Shelby Rogers with a set advantage in their third round. Kudermetova serving for the first set in their fourth round. And Tomjanovic serving for the second set in their quarter final. Jabeur was able to come back from all of those situations, and again against the unflappable Iga Swiatek in finals, she rallied from a breakdown and got it to a tiebreak, which is probably the biggest achievement anybody can take in a Swiatek final over the last 10 finals of hers, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
And saving match point, of course, which was crazy. So Jabeur was still able to use that to her advantage in the final. A lot of people maybe observing Jabeur maybe will think, oh, she's a bit of a nervy player, which isn't entirely untrue, but there's also a lot of evidence to say she's great in other pressure situations and with her back against the wall. In particular, she's really effective. So do you think going forward this is the sort of thing she'll have to rely on to win finals? Or do you think she will, well, firstly, do you think she'll win finals, sorry, but do you think she's the kind of player that can sort of use her own game to win the final outright, if that makes sense? Or do you think she'll
Mm-hmm.
always be sort of clawing back from adversity if she does win eventually? Or do you think she just won't win a final at all?
I'll come to the sort of generic question, if you like, about whether she'll go on to win a slam or not, is a second part. But I think she's somebody who's turned a corner in the last 18 months or so. And she's come on in leaps and bounds. I mean, she's now world number 2. Even probably the beginning of the clay court season, I remember thinking she's good, but I don't see her as a major winner. I
Yeah.
don't maybe even see her as a major finalist. This was at the beginning of the clay court season this year, and
Yeah.
perhaps I was being unfair. I mean, she obviously gets to the final in Rome, but She's beaten comfortably there by Iga. I think that was this year, 6-2,
She
6-2.
she she won Madrid, of course, as well.
And she won in Madrid,
Yeah,
yeah. But Madrid, of course, we do know is a bit of an outlier when it comes to the clay court season, certainly on the men's side, but I think it's the same for the women as well. The conditions there do seem to be a bit different to Roland Garros, and that's, of course, what we're thinking about. And of course, she goes out in the first round at Roland Garros, which, bringing it to the second sort of part of your question in terms of whether she can rely on this mental strength, if you like, that she's built up, and she's certainly stronger mentally than she was, say, 18 months ago. As I say, I think she's turned a corner both in terms of her game and her mental strength, but there is still a final step that she's yet to make, and it's two finals, or two major finals now, or two Grand Slam finals, as it turns out, back to back, similar to Casper Ruud in a way, who obviously was at the French Open final, and now also here at the US Open, and it's gonna be a thing that she's gonna have to get it done quite soon in terms of these major finals. I don't want it to become three major finals in a row and three losses, or four in a row. Um, she's the second best player in the world right now. I think there's very little doubt about that. Whether she'll be in that situation come January when it's the Australian Open, don't really know, because the women's game, we saw how the WTA finals went last year, and we saw how players like Sakkari and Paula Badosa and who won the WTA
and
finals last?
Muguruza won the
Muguruza, yeah,
finals. Yeah,
exactly. We've seen those three, who were three of the eight competitors there, and I think Sakkari was in the final. Was she against
no, that was
Muguruza?
Kontaveit was in the final.
Kontaveit was in the
Yeah,
final,
yeah.
sorry. But anyway, we saw all three of those in those finals, and we saw Muguruza win it. How the next 12 months has turned out for those three players in particular, and they're nowhere to be seen when it comes to the discussion about majors. So things can change quite quickly in women's tennis. There's so many players that are in the doldrums right now who may return to form. We've seen it with Muguruza before, by the way, who's had a year or two who's just gone downhill quite fast, and then just suddenly come back and win a slam again. So my concern with major, with the bigger picture, with Ons Jabeur, and the bigger picture is, don't know. She's 27,
Yeah, she's
28,
27 or 28 now.
27.
28 now. Yeah,
You just don't know when that next major chance is going to be. I think with somebody like Carlos Alcaraz, who's 19, or Iga, who's 21, and obviously Iga's already won a couple. You know that something like the French Open for Iga, or Carlos Alcaraz across, as I say, three of the four slams, you know that they're going to be back and going to be knocking at the door constantly for the next decade or so. The Jabeur's not quite in that fortunate position for both her, because of her age, and also just because of where she is in the pecking order. Don't know. I would say that there's something like a 60% chance that she will win a slam at some point in her career. She's obviously in a good situation that she's good across all three surfaces, albeit that she went out the first round of the French Open last year. I do think that'll turn out to be an anomaly. But you don't know. The gap between her and Iga will be bigger on clay, and Iga and the rest. Hard court, any one of 10 or 20 players could win it.
yeah.
And this mental side of it, she's made a big step, but the biggest step of all is yet to be overcome.
Yeah, loads of interesting stuff there, John, especially keeping us grounded with some comparisons to other players. Certainly, Sophia Kenin was the player that came to mind for me in 2020, that not only won a slam but made the second final in Roland Garros, and her forms completely fell off a cliff, of course. It's very easy for players without a overtly massive weapon, I guess, to lose form quite quickly, and certainly confidence for a player like Jabeur probably helps. So the more she's winning, the more she wins again. The more she's losing, the more she loses again. And I wouldn't be surprised if next year we don't see her in our final. The only maybe outlier for me is that Wimbledon really does suit her game, and playing on grass, she's a lot better than a lot of the tour. And she does have weapons there that she can make work. I think her run to the final this year was not surprising at all. But to be hit off the court maybe by somebody like Rybakina wasn't too much of a surprise. Given her record in finals, and that's the other thing I wanted to touch on, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw her in a few more Wimbledon finals. But if nerves got in the way again, she has now lost 4 finals from a set up, and of course it's three titles to 7 runner-ups overall. So it's final nerves, and she's talked about it herself, aren't it's not coincidental that she's losing finals, basically. So she would have to take that next step for me to feel confident. But yeah, Wimbledon is her best chance in the future, and I'm not ruling her out of that slam yet. I would
The
say in
thing
the
is,
future.
she's lost the finals and in different manners. So I remember part of your question as well, which I didn't fully address, was about, will she be somebody that'll go into these finals and constantly have to put out fires, so to speak, to get herself back into the match. And her
Yeah,
run to the final, she was a really good point that you made. I wasn't, when as you mentioned each match, I was like, oh yeah, she was in a bit of trouble there. But the two major finals in particular were lost in very different manners, which I don't know if that's a
yeah,
good thing or a bad thing, but she was obviously leading from the front at Wimbledon, a set up, and you mentioned how she's been a set up in 3 of the last 4 finals that she's lost. Obviously, it was very different against Iga, but that's also how it is against Iga. A lot of the time, you are sort of fighting an uphill battle often from the beginning. Yeah, Wimbledon. Yeah, as you said, I think it's the same on the men's side, and I think grass is a bit more particular in that there do seem to be less challenges, and Iga isn't one of them. So yeah, it's quite possible that we'll see her in another final there, but still, just don't know. I think 60% feels about right to me in terms of the likelihood that she will go on to win a slam.
yeah. I'd maybe put it a little bit less myself, John. But yeah, she's not totally out of the running. I agree. But yeah, good to keep us grounded with other player comparisons there. A few stats just to round us up on the Swiatek Jabeur final, and then we'll move on. She is one of the last 5 champions to win at the US Open at 22 years old or younger. First woman to win 2 slams in a single season, of course, since Angelique Kerber in 2016. And first woman to win the French and the US in the same year since Serena in 2013. Long may Swiatek's #1 dominance continue. It's very exciting. Shall we move on to Alcaraz and Ruud?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So Carlos Alcaraz's first US Open. Of course, I'll give you some stats off the bat on this one. Most physical Grand Slam win in the Open era at 23 hours and 40 minutes on court. He saved a match point along the way, of course, against Yannick Sinner in the quarterfinal. That's the second time this year he's won a title-saving match point, so it's not an Alcaraz anomaly. Of course, he beat de Minaur in Barcelona from 2 match points down and went on to win that tournament. Youngest ever #1 at 19 years old and 4 months, younger than Hewitt by a year and 5 months. First teenage #1 in the Open era. First player in the Open era to win the US Open in their second appearance. And yeah, Iga and Carlos as a combo have won 10 of the 21 big titles this year.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was interesting how they congratulated each other on Twitter as well. Certainly after Carlos won, I think maybe Iga congratulated him, and they had a little nice exchange on Twitter, congratulating each other as though they're going to be doing this. They could probably just put a repeat on that as and when over the next decade or so, because I think it's going to be a common theme where they're both winning majors at the same time.
Yeah, what's the compound of Carlos and Iga? Carliga, I guess. Carliga, the Carliga
Quite
era.
possibly.
Yeah, first thing I wanted to talk about is the belief of Carlos Alcaraz, because I think it's a very relevant word to this final. If we talk about Carlos and we talk about Ruud, talking about Alcaraz's side first. In the press conference, he was talking about the first time he believed he could win a slam. He said it was when he won in Miami. He felt like after that, putting great matches in a row, putting great wins in a row, that was the first time he really felt like he believed he could win a slam. And on the other side of the net, we had Casper Ruud, who touched on maybe respecting his opponent a little too much. I haven't heard the words from him before. He believes he can win a slam, I guess. I'm sure he does if he's getting to a final. Maybe he's just not addressed it. But talking about this is just interesting. I think that he talked about small percentages of fear or respect in your opponent's head before going out in a match. He said it's certainly how he looks at matches. Like when he plays Rafa on clay, most of the players have already lost the match before they step out because they know it's almost impossible to beat him. He feels like he didn't mention it about Alcaraz, but I wonder if Ruud kind of maybe had that in the back of his head. Sort of thought Alcaraz's peak level is unmatchable, or he felt like maybe he respected him a bit too much. Basically, for me, it sounded like Alcaraz thought he was winning that final, and Ruud maybe still had a little bit of doubt. Is that an unfair assessment, John? And it's certainly how I felt going into the match, but I don't know how you feel.
No, actually, I didn't see it that way, with the exception of maybe a 5-minute spell. which is possibly contradicting my answer in a way because sometimes in tennis, and I think this match as well, 5 minutes is too much
Yeah.
if you want, especially if you're playing Carlos Alcaraz at the US Open or perhaps and Nadal on clay in Paris. But no, I didn't feel as though he was affected by nerves or being in awe of his opponent in the same way that he was in Paris against Rafa. I think I think both players produced. It was one of the reasons why it was a very good final, not quite hitting the heights, of course, of that quarterfinal that Alcaraz had against Sinner, but it was a phenomenal final. It was interesting that actually some of the amazing points. Actually, it was Casper Ruud that would emerge victorious among. I remember when I was reviewing the Alcaraz Sinner match to try and make sure, because I was very aware watching that match that Sinner played just as big a part in the unbelievable match that it was. But actually, every time I was sort of highlighting this amazing point, it was like 3/4 of the time it would be a point that Alcaraz would go on to win. When it came to the amazing points in this match, actually, it was kind of the way around. Often it was Casper Ruud winning them. You were still, it was still phenomenal to see both players unbelievably, doing the Alcaraz doing what he does, chasing balls down that you just think are impossible. But no, I think Ruud did turn up. I think the first set was very competitive. The second set he won, as it turned out, fairly comfortably. There were in the first 4 games of the match, there were break points in each of the service games, and as it turned out, no one broke in those first 4 games of the match. It was 2-2. But maybe Ruud needed to get on the board, so to speak, in terms of a break of serve at that stage of the match. But most crucially, if there was a point in the match where there was a mental frailty, it was in this, probably a bit more than 5 minute spell. It was maybe sort of near a 10-minute spell because there was the crucial last game of the third set when he has 2 set points. And he doesn't take advantage of them. One of them, I think it was a very good serve from Alcaraz, but there was another one uh, from Alcaraz's perspective. But I'd probably rather focus on certainly these set points, and the tiebreakers very differently though. These set points, I probably would focus a bit more on Alcaraz doing a great job to save them rather than any mistake or freezing in the headlights, so to speak, from Casper Ruud, because interestingly, one of the set points is set up by an excellent return of serve from Casper Ruud, which flies past Alcaraz. And Alcaraz is doing basically a serve and volley, and he charges into the net, but it's no good because Casper Ruud has either read it or is just simply returning too well.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, okay, maybe don't dive into the net quite so keenly on this set point that's now about to come, because it was Juice that set up that set point for Casper Ruud. And yet he just does exactly the same. And it seems as though Alcaraz's belief in the philosophy, whether that was instilled in him before the match from Ferrero or whether it was just a feeling in the moment, he stuck with it. And in fact, the next point he won largely because he decided to do a serve and volley. I think it finished with a fairly easy smash, but it was set up by the serve and volley technique, if you like. But no, back to your point, with the exception of the tiebreak, I think he turned up, unlike in Roland Garros, where he didn't turn up at all, whether it be set 1, 2, or 3 there.
Yeah, loads and loads to say on that, because you touched on quite a lot of it. The tactics for Casper touched on all of this basically in his press conference, and I've also got a few takes on his takes. But yeah, he said he basically played the match looking to take the legs away from Carlos, which overall, great tactic, because Carlos himself said from the back of the court, he felt like he wasn't winning as many points as when he could take things forward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he was thinking on those set points. He said himself he was nervous because he felt like he was losing from the back of the court, so he took it forward whenever he could. The one thing I would say though, so the second set point I think was great. Serve and volley, there wasn't maybe a lot that Ruud could have done about it. I think he had a backhand return on it, but I will touch on that in a second. The first set point, Casper was too passive for my liking on the return, and he said it himself. He felt like maybe he was a little too passive. He gave the onus to Alcaraz. All credit to Alcaraz to deliver. To be fair, he came up with the right shot, and a great forehand, I think, to set up a pretty easy volley at or maybe it wasn't that easy a volley actually, but still, he
No, it
gave
was sensational.
yeah, it was pretty good, but gave himself the opportunity anyway to hit a winning volley, and of course, as we are starting to learn, Carlos came up clutch. So I think Ruud, maybe overall tactics were correct to sort of pin Alcaraz to the back of the court, make him work physically, but in the bigger moments, he should have been a little bit more brave, I think. Certainly against Kachanov, we think about that 56, 55 shot rally and his ability to flatten out the backhand down the line. I think he should have been using that backhand return. Should have stepped in because serve and volley was not inevitable on the bigger points, but Carlos certainly coming forward was probably more likely at some point in the bigger points. And I feel like maybe Ruud's deep return position was a tactical misplay when that was an option. Kachanov himself said that he was able to take the backhand down the line a lot better than the last time they played. Called him an overall consistent baseliner, which is true. But I think, yeah, he was also overly impressed by Ruud's new ability to flatten out that backhand. Of course, he's changed his grip to give himself that option. But I just feel like he didn't use that against Alcaraz. He gave Alcaraz the option to win to put the match in his hands, basically, and I think that'll be his biggest regret. Of course, yeah, I agree, John. He played really well overall.
Yeah, just to react to, sorry, I'm sure you got something else to say, but just a quick thing that I noticed from Craig O'Shaughnessy, who I think has done a bit of coaching with, or at least tactical analysis with Djokovic in the past. He just came up with something that was just backing up what you said about the back of the court points in particular. So Casper Ruud won a ridiculously high 65% of second serve points versus Alcaraz. He committed less errors and won more points at the baseline than his opponent. O'Shaughnessy says he'll never play that well again and lose. Bravo, Casper. And generally, that's how I felt. But sorry, go on, carry on.
No, that's a really interesting point. Yeah, I feel like Craig's right in a lot of ways, but yeah, there was maybe just a little bit of, I guess, viciousness missing in some of the bigger points for me that I wonder if that'll be something that sticks with him in Grand Slam finals to come. Hopefully not, but yeah, I think that's the only thing that was
I,
missing today.
I think as well when he was broken in the fourth, obviously it was the final and most significant perhaps break of the match. Um, that was a rally as it turned out. But, he was taking risks in that rally, Casper Ruud. He wasn't going for winners as such, but I remember an excellent deep shot that was probably less than a meter inside the baseline that sort of, kicked up a fair bit. And I thought, well, it was just because Alcaraz dealt with it so well. And in fact, in that rally, that wasn't a really lengthy rally, he actually gets broken because of an unforced error that is probably, they don't do a close call on it, but at least watching on the camera, and I've watched it a few times now, it feels like it must have been millimeters or maximum centimeters out. So that is Casper Ruud pushing the boundaries during a rally, if you like. I don't think there's much for him to regret personally. Maybe that set point, the one of the two set points, maybe he could have gone for it in a bigger way. But that's obviously being clever after the event, and he could have gone for it in a big way, and then also lost the point. I just think it's the tiebreak, really.
Yeah, he did say it was horrendous, was his own
Yeah,
words, which is
yeah,
fair. I think he shanked like 3 shots.
yeah.
Yeah,
And also, I mean, I think he shanked three, at least one more, but I think it was more, was an unforced error. But unforced error, when I say unforced error, not quite in the same manner as he was broken in the fourth set, like I say, with that one that, he's pushing the boundaries by trying to hit the baseline as often as he can, and it just goes long. They were just wild. I mean, the final one that was 6-1 was on the forehand. And I think, to be honest with you, it's the forehand from memory that it was the shanks were generally they are on the forehand side, were his timing was just way off, and the final set point was 6-1, the first of 5 set points that Carlitos was going to have, if you like, was a forehand that went way out. I
yeah.
don't even know if it made the tram line. If it did,
No, it
it
didn't.
was
It didn't. I
it didn't,
remember it.
right, exactly.
Yeah,
But it was heading towards the tram line, and it's one of those that actually, looking back, I just thought, oh, it lands in the tram line. But I knew it was, as soon as it left his racket, just like with the shanks, you thought, oh, hello. It was
Yeah.
bizarre, really, because I mean, we talked about it on the stream about their tiebreak records, and of course, Carlos had lost 4 out of 4 at the U.S. Open, albeit his record throughout the year had been much better. And Casper Ruud's tiebreak record was pretty favourable. I think he won one against Khachanov in the semi-final, perhaps, but he certainly had a favourable record, I think, and just didn't see that coming, bearing in mind how the previous sort of 3 sets had gone.
The last couple of things I wanted to say. One thing was Juan Carlos Ferrero's interview after the match, and he said two very alarming things, I think, for all of Alcaraz's opponents. The first was that Alcaraz was losing a little bit of the love for the game, apparently, in Montreal and Cincinnati, is what he said after he lost to Tommy Paul and Cam Norrie. Ferrero said he felt like he wasn't playing the game he wanted to play, basically, and encouraged him to go to the net on any ball that was short throughout the entirety of the US Open. Basically said to be ultra aggressive and play his favourite game style, which is, finish the points as quickly as possible, get to the net wherever you can. Basically, Carlos was just having a lot of fun during his title run this week, and when he's having as much fun as he can, he tends to play his best tennis. Is the takeaway from that, I feel. The other thing that Ferrero said is that Carlos currently is at about 60% of his total potential. There's a lot to improve, apparently. I mean, I suppose if you really think about it, the forehand did go away at times during the tournament. The serve was, not as attacking as it could have been. The backhand return, though generally consistently aggressive, did sometimes fail them in some bigger moments. I mean, I'm really nitpicking though, and I'm very surprised Ferrero is. What was your feeling about those two things? I mean, is it just a joke to Ferrero? I have no idea.
He's a funny guy. By the way, was this before I address some of those points you just highlighted there, and there's a lot to talk about. Did he have his own press conference, Juan Carlos Ferrero, or
Did, yeah, he did.
Okay, I don't know if they always have that. Certainly don't remember Carlos Moya ever doing it. Nadal's coach, but I do remember one with Marian Vida, Djokovic's former coach at the French Open last year. I think that's when Vida said he can go on and win all 4 this year,
Mm-hmm.
which certainly set that ball rolling. Although I think you could probably say I think Djokovic set it rolling by winning that French Open. Okay, but that's interesting. Yeah, and regarding some of those comments about, well, first of all, I didn't know that about this sort of spell of not enjoying life or not enjoying the game so much, if you like. Albeit it's just for a couple of weeks. It sounds like during
Yeah.
the US swing or the North American swing. Um, Sometimes we hear about. I mean, I know Andre Agassi talks about it in his book, Open. And I know many other players have spoken openly about their frustrations with the game, and sometimes those frustrations have lasted months or even years. But Alcaraz certainly was having fun. There was a moment in the final, funny enough, and he loses the point.
Mm-hmm.
He's lying prostrate on the floor. I think it's in the third set. But he's okay with losing the point, and he's sort of lying prostrate on the floor with his belly down, and his hands are out, almost a bit like Djokovic was when he won that
Yeah.
unbelievable point against Sinner at Wimbledon, if we all remember that, and the Superman thing. But he's smiling. He's smiling, and I'm not saying he's fine with losing. He's clearly a competitor, and he certainly gets frustrated too, and he also got frustrated during this tournament at times. But he's smiling, which I think gave you a good indication of where his mental state was in that final at a very crucial stage as it was coming up to. I think it was towards the end of the third set. And I said to a friend of mine earlier this year, I said, this guy is the real deal. I said, the only thing we don't know is, what's he going to be like on the day of a major final, if you like, or a slam final, I should say. Sometimes I say majors, sometimes I say slams. I'm kind of doing a hybrid of the two. I mean, I think in the
Taking a
US they
bit
tend to stick
titles.
to majors, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean. So yeah, and regarding 60% of his capacity, well, actually some of the weaknesses or some of the areas of improvement that Juan Carlos Ferrero touched upon. Actually, he did do pretty well on those. Some of his net plays, volleys. I think even the backhand didn't let him down in the final. These are all areas, and the serve, certainly the first serve. Actually, we haven't touched upon that. I know that a
I
lot
should
is
be
made of.
clear. Sorry, I should be clear. Sorry, Ferrero didn't say those things about his the shots in particular. That was just my assessment
No,
on
I
them,
think he
basically. Yeah.
has said it. If it wasn't in that press conference, it was elsewhere, or maybe it
Okay.
was, maybe it was elsewhere, or maybe it's just been pundits that have suggested where is that 40%, and we're, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that it's his serve that could obviously do a bit better with that, and there's certain areas of improvement there. I don't. One thing I will say though is people say what it'd be like when he has an amazing serve, then it'd be impossible. Well, I think there is a ceiling. We're not going
Yeah.
to suddenly see John Isner levels of serving from it ever in his career. We just think that maybe at some point in his career it won't be a weakness anymore. It'll be top 10 level if you like. Um, and actually on Sunday in that final, certainly the first serve was top one level. I mean, he out aced Casper Ruud, and I know Casper Ruud historically hasn't been known for his serve, but this year, in particular, the US Open, I think people were starting to take note of Casper Ruud's serve as being a real weapon. I know Gil Gross suggested that pound for pound, he's got the best and certainly fastest serve in the game, given his height and his overall body demeanor, if you like. But it was Alcaraz, and in that final set, it was his serve that would occasionally get him out of a sticky situation, or in the final game of the match that would basically win the match for him. It was his serve. The fact he was able to deliver up aces and unreturnables in that final match, because actually in the rallies, sometimes he was just starting to feel it in that final game as he was trying to serve it out. We talk about trying to serve it
Mhm.
out, and we talk about the anxiety involved regarding that when you're trying to serve out a match, or in this case, a championship. He wasn't having a problem serving it out, so to speak. He was having a problem when it was in the rally. Because do you remember the smash he put into the net?
Yeah. That was
That
like
was on championship point, I think, at 40-15. And he doesn't do that smash, I don't think, if it's any other point of the match, really, or any other game of the match. But he does, because, of course, that's in a moment. But his serve was fine in
it
that. And it
was.
was an
Yeah.
unreturnable, obviously ended up winning the match.
I think it's also interesting to keep in mind that having a serve that you don't take risks on as much, although yeah, of course that fourth set was counterintuitive, I guess, and that Alcaraz spot served really well. But having a serve you don't take risks on means you make more first serves. You set yourself up for shorter balls generally, even though the returns do come back. It's kind of like Rafa in that if you just get a strong serve into play, you can rely on mopping up on your +1 shot. So
Mhm.
actually, having a serve that isn't particularly accurate could be more effective for Alcaraz's game than if he did have a spot serve.
He did do something with a serve, and it turned out to be an ace that I don't see that often, or at least from memory, I don't. Which is he actually aced Alcaraz. This was earlier in the match. I honestly I can't remember which point of the match. It was probably some point in the second set, I'll say. But he aced Casper Ruud with a body serve.
Yeah, I think did he do that against Sinner as well in match
Oh,
point?
he might
Maybe.
have done.
I
He
think
might
he
have done.
did. Yeah, I think he did. At that point, it was 8 in the morning, and weary eyed. But I'm pretty sure I remember that it just went straight past it, straight through center, I
Yeah,
should say.
straight through.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, yeah, it's an effective serve, 130 miles an hour into the body.
Mhm.
Let's not
And his
be
kick
silly
serve
about
as
that.
well. I mean, is something. I mean, I'm not trying to build him up to be at the moment. I don't think his serve would be in the top 10 in the world, but in that final, it probably was, and that
Yeah, yeah.
helped him a lot.
Yeah, I'd agree, John. And I think it was just confidence oozing from him in that fourth set, certainly. But yeah, I think there's not you're quite right. There's not tons to be worried about. This 40% of his game being missing, and I do think maybe Ferrero's just playing a little bit of mind games there, possibly to the
I,
rest
I
of the
think he's
field.
playing mind because I know one or two have speculated he may be playing games with the opponents, but I don't. I actually think he's playing mind games with Carlos there.
Yeah, yeah, possibly. Yeah. Just trying to make sure don't rest on your laurels, I guess, and just be like, this isn't the end of the road. This
Lots
isn't
of
what we've
areas
come
to
here to
improve.
do.
And I've heard coaches in other sports say the same about, players, proteges, if you like, at 18, 19, 20. And it seems to be a smart move.
Yeah, yeah. I think the main takeaway is this isn't where we stop. Carlos is basically what Ferrero's saying. So it's yeah. I honestly think it is. Mind games is probably the assessment I would come to as well, John. It's really interesting. The final thing, very quickly to touch on, is that Alcaraz very recently said in a New York Times article that he doesn't want to take credit away from himself. But it's true that Rafa, Djokovic, Federer, they were in a period where they were all playing. I had the luck, or whatever you want to call it, that Djokovic could not play at this tournament.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's a fair assessment, what Alcaraz is saying? What's your thoughts on the big three not being in the Alcaraz era, I guess, at the peak of their powers? And
I mean,
I
there's
mean,
this.
well,
There seems to be two elements there. I'll address the second one, and then we'll talk about the broader picture regarding the big three. Djokovic's record at the U.S. Open isn't phenomenal. We're not talking Australia levels here. I think he's won
yeah,
3 U.S. Opens. He's not won it since 2018.
he goes deep
Um,
most of the time, though. To be
he
fair,
goes deep, but I don't know why exactly. It could be a part of the year, and when he missed Australia, you were thinking. "Hmm, that's him potentially giving up a slam. I didn't view it in the same way in New York that he was potentially giving up a slam,
of course,
partly because he barely played this year. So, I think going into Australia having barely played is a bit different to going into New York having barely played. We've seen Djokovic do very well under those circumstances, but this is also New York where things have turned out a bit differently for him than in Australia. If in a parallel universe, he plays both of these majors. If you whispered in my ear, by the way, in that parallel universe, he won one of the two. If you then said to me that was New York, I'd be like, oh, okay.
yeah,
I would have said Australia in that parallel universe. So I don't. I think that's very kind of Alcaraz to pay homage to Djokovic, and on the hard court, he's obviously going to be phenomenal. Blah blah blah. But there's no guarantees he would have won in New York, and certainly there's no level of certainty that he won in New York compared to how it was in Australia. So that's very nice of him to say that. But listen, Alcaraz was as deserving of this title just as much as Nadal was in Australia or Djokovic was in Paris last year
yeah,
when I know there's been talks obviously about Nadal's condition with his foot etc in Paris last year. Whether they're there or not, you just play phenomenally. I mean, listen,
yeah,
Alcaraz certainly worked pretty hard for this tournament. Let's say that. But talking about the bigger picture and the big three, etc. Yeah, I think Alcaraz has got a fair point. It's been made by others. I don't quite know. You've also got to think about how the nature of the conversation was going with the journalist at the New York Times. Maybe they said, "Oh, Djokovic being here, maybe that was a bit of a stroke of luck, or
yeah.
maybe that
That's true.
helped." And then suddenly he responds to that. Maybe
Yeah,
they also asked him about the big three, and do you think maybe it'd be a bit easier for you because you won't have to deal with them, unlike Tsitsipas, Zverev, et al. Um, However, that is a point, and that obviously Tsitsipas, it's that group really that I'm probably more worried about regarding
yeah,
Alcaraz. Nadal and Djokovic will retire at some point, and they will retire on 22, 23, 24, who knows how many majors. And I think they'll be pretty happy with that lot. Um, and perhaps Alcaraz will prevent them from winning lots more, if you like. I wouldn't be surprised by that. I think Gil Gross is the second time I mentioned him during this pod. He's somebody who mentioned earlier on this year that actually it's Carlos Alcaraz that is starting to temper his thoughts with just how many majors Nadal and Djokovic will go on to win. However, having said all that, um, they did win 3 of the 4 majors this year.
hmm
Um, I would say if you said to me they'll win 3 of the 4 next year, I'd say that sounds about right. And
yeah,
Alcaraz wins the other in any sort of shape and form. Maybe Nadal wins Wimbledon and Djokovic wins Paris. Who knows? And Alcaraz picks up Australia and New York goes back to Djokovic, despite what I said before. I mean, that just wouldn't surprise me at all if they won 3 of the 4 next year. If you start talking about 5 years down the road, I don't. I just can't see Rafa playing 5 years from now. 3 years from now, even would be an ask of
yeah.
Rafa. What I would like probably is to see the three of them, Djokovic, Nadal, and Alcaraz, have a fully fit entry into countries allowed 12 months going at it hell
hmm
for leather. That is a 12 months very much to look forward to.
Yeah, Australia's the one I'm most excited for, because obviously you've got defending champ, you've got the Australian Open GOAT, and then you've got the last hardcourt slam winner, basically all hopefully contesting the for the title, which is exactly what you said. If you could have all three, it'd be great. So that's what I'm most looking forward to. And yeah, just as a closing note, basically from me, I don't think you win a slam by accident. So all credit to Alcaraz, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, this is hopefully the first of many. I think he was great.
Yeah, he was.
We'll close up shop there, I think, just so I can wrap this up and get it out hopefully as soon as possible. John, thank you very much for joining me as always.
Jack, you're a busy man at the moment, right? That's one of the reasons why you want to get it done as soon as possible.
Yeah, I'll be actually I'm on court first. I'm coaching for a few hours, and then I'll be at the Davis Cup later on this evening. Okay. So yeah, I'm rushing about basically from place to place. Cool. So yeah, exciting stuff, John, for me. Listeners, thank you very much for listening this far through. Please go to Talking Tennis on Twitter. You can follow it at Talking Tennis TT, and my stuff you can catch it on the line _Jack or on the line tennis.uk. Thank you very much for listening. We'll catch you next time on the On the Line Tennis podcast. Cheers, John. Thank you very much.
Cheers.